The AFC East is one of the most competitive divisions in football, certainly some big rivalries and some very good players. Today we're going to be going through every single position group and seeing kind of how this division stacks up, how all four teams compare to one another. So let's go ahead and dive into obviously the most important position in football, the quarterback position. And the Buffalo Bills do have the best quarterback in the division with Josh Allen. I think he's a top 3 quarterback in the NFL right now. So, I really don't think there's much of an argument for any of the other quarterbacks in this division. Aaron Rodgers, we haven't seen do it too recently. Tua is not on the same level as Josh Allen. And then you've got Drake Maye or Jacoby Brissett at quarterback for the Patriots. So, none of them really compare to what Josh Allen has been able to do in the NFL and his pure talent level as well. So, obviously, Rodgers in his prime was there, but, at his current state, coming off an injury, I don't think that he has, a lot of competition for being one of those top 3 quarterbacks in the NFL like Josh Allen does. But then we are going to go to Aaron Rodgers. I think he is the second best quarterback in this division. Even with the injury, I still think he is uber talented. I do think that he is going to have a nice bounce back year as long as he is able to stay healthy. His offensive line is a lot better this year than it has been. They added some good tackles in that room. I do think he has a good connection with Garrett Wilson, and they will be productive this year, I think, on that offense, which hasn't been the case in a while. Then we're going to go to Tua at number 3 in the division. I think you would rate him above Drake Maye or Jacoby Brissett, who are going to be in that number 4 slot. I do think Drake Maye has awesome potential to be a really good quarterback, but obviously he's unproven. Jacoby Brissett is kind of that classic bridge type quarterback, so they're very clearly in the number 4 slot. I think Tua is a little bit of a system quarterback. That doesn't mean he's a bad quarterback, but I think Mike McDaniel gets the most out of him by being able to use his anticipation, his accuracy, his timing. He's really good in those couple of areas. He doesn't have the biggest arm. He's not the most powerful thrower of the football. I think there's some bad decisions that he makes at times as well, but overall, I think the quarterbacks are pretty clear-cut in this division. But, let me know if you do disagree on that in the comments down below. At running back up next, this is actually pretty tough. I really like the running backs for a couple of teams in this division, but I am going to give the number 1 slot to the Dolphins here. Now, I do think the best running back in this division is Breece Hall, but the committee that the Dolphins have is really impressive. You got Raheem Mostert, who scored a ton of touchdowns last year, was incredibly productive in this scheme. You've also got Devon Achane, who was looking like he was an absolute monster before going down with an injury, came back and still was pretty productive. And then they got my number 2 running back in this past draft in Jaylen Wright. I thought Jaylen Wright was a great explosive runner that was going to be a perfect scheme fit for one of those Shanahan wide zone style systems, which is exactly where he's landed in Miami. So definitely think that Dolphins running back room just has a ton of pure talent, but I am going to give the number 2 slots to the New York Jets. I think Breece Hall is the best running back in this division. He is a complete running back. I'd say he's a top 10 running back just with his vision, his contact balance, his power. He's got good speed. He's got great patience. I do think that he is a tough guy to tackle. They also added Braylon Allen to that room. We've got Izzy Abakanda, who they drafted from Pitt last year as well. So they've got some talent in that running back room. Then we're going to go to the Buffalo Bills. I do like James Cook. I think he's turned into a productive, 3-down player. I do think he is useful in the passing game. They've got some decent talent in that room behind James Cook as well. They also have a couple of interesting guys behind him. Ray Davis was a guy I really liked that they drafted this year. So, I do think the Bills do have a decent running back room. And then that leaves us at number 4 with the New England Patriots. I do think Ramondre Stevenson is pretty decent. He wasn't always the most dominant runner with Ezekiel Elliott also there with him, but now it's Ramondre Stevenson, Antonio Gibson. I do think you can make the case that might be slightly better than Buffalo's room, but I just think that James Cook is potentially still ascending. I think we've kind of seen what Stevenson is for the most part, which is a productive runner, but I do think that the Patriots have the number 4 running back room in this division as well. Moving on to the wide receivers up next, Miami Dolphins absolutely have to be number 1 here. You've got Tyreek Hill. He's a top 3 wide receiver in the NFL, I'd say. You've also got Jaylen Waddle, who's one of the best number 2s in the league. They just signed Odell Beckham as well. I think that Beckham is kind of more of a name than an elite player at this point, but I still think he is a really good player as well. That's a really nice trio of wide receivers for Tua Tagovailoa to throw the ball to. Then at number 2, I've got the Jets. They finish number 2 once again. And you've got Garrett Wilson. That's really nice. But you've also got Mike Williams, who you signed in free agency as well. If he can stay healthy, which is a massive if, I think he's a pretty nice player. I do think he can be, a productive member of that offense as well. You drafted Malachi Corley, who can be a nice yak weapon. You've got Alan Lazard also in that room, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but Aaron Rodgers seems to trust. I think that's a decent room. I do love Garrett Wilson. I think if he was playing with a half-competent quarterback at any point in his career so far, he would be really, really good. So, I do expect him to have another great year. And I do think that the other 2 teams in this division are lacking some talent in that wide receiver room. We are going to go to the Buffalo Bills next. You drafted Keon Coleman. I think that Coleman's a really interesting player, but, he still has a lot to prove as a rookie. There's not a ton of talent that's proven behind him. You've got Khalil Shakir, who I thought did some nice things. Curtis Samuel's more of kind of that gadget type design touch kind of player who has a role, but he's not super proven. And then once again, the New England Patriots come in last here. I hate their wide receiver room pretty much. You do have Jaylen Polk, who you drafted this year. You've brought in Javon Baker as well, who I think both of those guys could turn into nice players, but they're just also big unknowns. And then you've got, Pop Douglas at slot wide receiver, Kendrick Bourne. Just not a lot of proven guys either. The Patriots, Bills, once again, could be interchangeable, but ultimately I do like Khalil Shakir. I have a little more faith in Keon Coleman than the guys the Patriots drafted, so that's why I went with the Bills and the slight edge there. But moving to tight end, it's very, very clearly the Bills at number 1. This is not a strong division for tight ends, but Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid, that's a really solid 1-2 at tight end. I think that's going to be a big thing for Josh Allen this year, relying on the tight ends and winning through the middle of the field. I think Kincaid showed some really nice things as a rookie, and I think Dawson Knox has showed some really nice things throughout his career just as a reliable tight end option. So definitely think they have the clear number 1 tight end room. Then at number 2, it is going to be the Patriots. Hunter Henry, I still think, is a productive player. He hasn't played with a great quarterback in a while, but I still think he can, do a lot in the receiving game. He's getting up there in age, hasn't been nearly as productive as he was in the past, but I do still think that he's a pretty decent player and the best tight end in this division on one of these last 3 teams. And then we're going to go with the New York Jets. You've got Tyler Conklin. You've got, some other guys there. None of them are really scaring you. You look at Jeremy Ruckert from Ohio State, Kenny Yeboah, Zach Kuntz, who was one of the most athletic tight end prospects but hasn't turned into anything at all. So just not a lot of proven talent there. I think that Tyler Conklin's a fine tight end, but he's not one of the better ones in the league. And then we go to the Miami Dolphins. This Dolphins tight end room, they've just kind of moved away from prioritizing this position. You just don't have a lot of guys that you're super scared of in this tight end room. Jonnu Smith is a nice move tight end within this kind of offense, but he hasn't been a super productive player in a while. Durham Smythe is more of a blocking tight end. Just not a lot there in the Dolphins tight end room, but that offense doesn't really use tight ends, so it's not the biggest deal, but if we are just ranking them, I think they're clearly number 4. Moving to offensive line, I think this could surprise some people, but I actually think the Jets have the best offensive line in this division. Obviously, last year, they were really bad, and the tackles were a huge problem, and it was a mess for Zach Wilson, but I do think that they attacked this offensive line really well. You've got Tyron Smith at left tackle. He is getting up there in age. You're probably not getting a full season out of him, but you drafted Olu Fashanu to take over that role once Tyron Smith inevitably kind of gets hurt. John Simpson, you signed in free agency. He was a starting caliber, pretty solid guard for the Ravens last year. Joe Tippmann stepped in at center and looked pretty decent. You've got Elijah Vera Tucker, who is kind of a Pro Bowl caliber guard or tackle, depending on where you need him. And then Morgan Moses was a really nice player for Baltimore as well. I think that's a really nice, complete offensive line. You've got Carter Warren, some contingency players as well, Max Mitchell, Wes Schweitzer, who you signed as well from Washington. I think that you've got some guys, you've got some depth, and this is a pretty decent offensive line room. I don't think that any of the teams in this division have an elite offensive line, but I think on paper the Jets do have the best offensive line despite how they played last year. Next up, we have the Bills at number 2. Deion Dawkins is still a really solid starting caliber left tackle. Signed him to an extension. He's a good player. We've got David Edwards at left guard, Connor McGovern at center. Those guys are fine players. You also drafted Cedric Van Pran out of Georgia in the 5th round this year. Cyrus Torrance was pretty decent for them at right guard. Spencer Brown is still a big question mark at right tackle. You do have Lael Collins, who you signed. If he is able to stay healthy and provide, a little bit of talent in that room, maybe he ends up being a good player for them. But ultimately, none of these guys besides Deion Dawkins are super exciting, but I think they can be a fine offensive line unit. I don't think they're anything special. They're probably at best average, but that is good enough for second in this division. At number 3, we have the Dolphins. And the Dolphins have some talent, but they also lost some talent as well this offseason. You have Isaiah Wynn, who you signed at left guard next to Teron Armstead. And Armstead's really good when he plays, but he's getting up there in age and he can never stay healthy. They drafted Patrick Paul in the 2nd round. I think he has a lot of talent, but there's still a lot of things he needs to work on. You did lose Connor Williams in free agency. You've got Aaron Brewer to replace him, who is super small. He's really undersized. I think he'll be pretty decent in this kind of system where the size might not hurt him too much, but that is kind of a concern that you do have. You lost Robert Hunt in free agency. You have Robert Jones currently kind of slated in there, and then Austin Jackson, who has had a very up and down career at right tackle. This Dolphins offensive line just has some big question marks. I think Connor Williams, Robert Hunt, those losses are relatively big, and you're just not quite sure what the offensive line is going to look like, especially if Teron Armstead goes through another injury. Obviously, Patrick Paul is kind of the contingency plan there, but he's just a major question mark, so that's what puts the Dolphins at number 3. And then the Patriots at number 4, just massive question marks on this offensive line. You let Isaiah Wynn walk. At left tackle, you're now probably going to be starting Caden Wallace out of Penn State, who played on the right side. I thought he was a raw prospect, probably overdrafted as well in the 3rd round. I thought that was a big reach, and him just being slated to start at left tackle, that is a huge question mark. Cole Strange, I really liked. When he was drafted, I didn't even think it was that outrageous that he was a 1st-round pick. But, he's shown some decent things. David Andrews is a decent player for them as well still. Sidney So, who started for them at right guard as a rookie last year. He was a 4th-round pick. He had a lot of growing pains. He wasn't great in pass protection, so certainly still a big question mark, hoping that he can develop there. And then you've got Onwenu at right tackle, who is a good player. I think he's probably best at guard, but he's a perfectly good right tackle who they re-signed. There's just major question marks on this offensive line, and for Drake Maye's sake, I really hope he doesn't get thrown into the fire with this weapon group and with this offensive line, because as you can see, I don't think super highly of this Patriots offensive roster. For the edge rusher position, this one is tough because there is a good amount of talent at the edge rush spot in this division, but I'm going to go with the Dolphins, and there's a big kind of asterisk on this here because both Bradley Chubb and Jaylen Phillips had season-ending late injuries last year, so they're not going to be good to go necessarily from the very start of the season. Now, when you look at this Dolphins edge rush, you've got some really nice players. Jaylen Phillips is somebody I still think is turning into a star edge rusher and a really, really good player for this Dolphins team. I think Bradley Chubb is a really nice number 2 edge rusher. I don't think he's necessarily that amazing number 2 edge rusher that some people think he is, but he is a really good number 2. Then you've got Chop Robinson, who you drafted in the 1st round. He's raw, but his pure athleticism and bend around the corner is deadly. And then you also have Shaq Barrett. You drafted Mo Kamara, who I really liked as well in the draft this year. So I think this Dolphins team does have some nice depth to it, but also the top-end star talent is there when they are fully healthy. Obviously the injuries are tough for them, but I'm still going to give them that number 1 spot as of right now. But number 2 is going to be the Jets. Jermaine Johnson has turned into a really nice player for them. He had a productive year, both against the run and the pass. You've also got Will McDonald, who you drafted last year, and then you get Hassan Reddick, who has just been a monster screaming off the edge. Been really effective within, the Philadelphia scheme. He was good in Carolina and Arizona. He's pretty much a lot of places he's gone. He's been really effective once kind of transitioning to that full-time edge rush role. You got to trust that Robert Saleh is going to continue to get the most out of him, even if he is getting up there a little bit in age. So I think that combination, those three guys, that is a really nice 1, 2, 3. And then we are going to go with the Bills at number 3. This is definitely debatable. There's a lot of talent in this division, but Greg Rousseau really kind of turned it on. I thought he was a really good player for them and, did kind of take over that role as a number 1 edge rusher for them. Once again, you're kind of projecting with Von Miller. We'll see if he's able to come back from injuries and be the same kind of player that he was before. It's kind of becoming increasingly more unlikely that that's the case just due to his age, and his production has dipped. Maybe he's not the same player, but he still gives you some juice there. AJ Epinesa, I think, is still a decent player as well. You have Dwan Smoot. It's a pretty nice room. And then the Patriots, you've got Matt Judon on this team still. He got injured and wasn't as productive as he has been in the past, but I still think that you definitely have some juice at that pass rush position with Matt Judon. You've got Jennings, who's been really productive out of Alabama. Josh Uche has been a really nice player for them as well. You've got Keon White. He's kind of an inside-outside guy. Same thing with Dietrich Wise. I absolutely think you can make the case that the Patriots don't deserve to be in the 4th slot for edge rush position, but it's just a very talented pass rushing division. So, you can't really be too mad when you look at the guys that all of the other teams in this division have as well. At the interior defensive line position, I am going to go with the Jets at number 1. I think they have one of the best, if not, the best interior rusher in the entire NFL now that Aaron Donald is gone and Quinnen Williams. You've also got Javon Kinlaw, who maybe didn't work out as a first-round pick for San Francisco, but I still think the talent's there. Robert Saleh, still definitely sees talent in him. I think you could get some stuff out of him. You've got Solomon Thomas, who's carved out a decent role in the NFL. You've got Lakey Fotu. There's some talent in that room besides Quinnen Williams, and you've got one of the best guys, in that penetrating role on the interior as well. It's pretty much him, Dexter Lawrence, a couple other guys, but, most definitely he's in the conversation for one of the best. So that kind of propels the Jets to that number 1 spot. But the Patriots do have some really nice interior room as well. I think Christian Barmore has turned into a fantastic player for them. Definitely was an excellent second-round pick out of Alabama. You've got Devon Godshaw as well. And then those other inside-outside guys that we've already mentioned. Keon White, there's Armon Watts. There's some pretty nice players there, and most of it comes from, I really believe that Christian Barmore is a top 10 interior defensive lineman probably in the NFL right now. He's excellent, and so that kind of propels the Patriots to that number 2 spot in that role. At number 3, going to go with the Bills. They've got some players in that role. Ed Oliver is a really nice pass rusher. He's undersized, but he's kind of that true penetrating 3 tech that a lot of teams are trying to find. He's done really well in that role. You've also got Daquan Jones, who I think is a solid player. You drafted Dwayne Carter, who I really liked out of Duke. It's not the most impressive room, but it's still relatively talented. And I do think it is better than the Dolphins room here, who did lose Christian Wilkins. I don't think you've got the best interior defensive line now. You've got Benito Jones, Tyre Tart, Neville Gallimore, Deshaun Hand. Those guys are fine. You've also got Zach Seiler, who's kind of, also a hybrid inside-outside guy. He's a pretty good player, but overall, I think the other teams in this division just do have a little bit more juice on the inside of that defense. Moving to linebacker, this is probably the one that was the most difficult for me to rank. I think all 4 of these teams have pretty decent linebackers, and they're all pretty close. It's not like one team really stands out as way better or way worse than the other teams in this division, but I did ultimately decide that I do like the Bills linebacker room the most. Matt Milano, still a heady, really instinctual player. Terrell Bernard, I thought, was a really nice player for them as well. He was productive, especially on blitzes. And then I liked Dorian Williams as a pick last year out of Tulane, I believe it was. He was a really nice player for them. So I do just like some of their talent in that room. And then moving on, we have the Jets up next. CJ Mosley has continued to be a rock for them. When he's able to stay healthy, he's a really nice player. He's a good coverage linebacker, very instinctual, heady. And I think he got the most out of Quincy Williams as well. When Mosley's kind of in there, he's doing a lot of the run fits. He's kind of doing all the dirty work. It allows Quincy Williams to just be that athlete and let him roam the field and run. Thought last year was by far his best year, as he was just able to kind of run and chase and be that kind of, sideline to sideline linebacker, and he was really productive in that role. For the Patriots, Jelani Tavai has turned into a real thumper for them. He started off really poorly in his career for the Lions, but has turned into a great player for them. And then you've also got Jawan Bentley. He's a pretty decent player. You've got some other guys, Sion Takitaki, Marte Mapu. There's guys on this team. Kyle Duggar kind of plays at linebacker or safety, hybrid role at times. It's a pretty good linebacker room. I think they lack some coverage ability. I do think Tavai is much, much better as a run stuffer. I think this Patriots linebacker room is really solid. And then that leaves us with the Dolphins at number 4. Again, I think this is a pretty decent linebacker room. David Long, I thought, was one of the best underrated signings last year. It's kind of that value linebacker, and I think he had a really nice season. He was more of a run stuffer than a pass coverage kind of player this past year, but I thought he did some really nice things. Jordan Brooks, you bring over from Seattle. He has not lived up to that first round hype, but I still think he's a useful player. You've got some other guys, but Anthony Walker, Channing Tindall, those guys are all decent players. Once again, these linebacker rooms in the AFC East is incredibly close. I think you could almost argue the complete opposite order, and I could understand the arguments for it. It really is very close, but that's just kind of how I see this linebacker room. Corners are a little bit more clear-cut to me. Starting with the Jets, I don't even think this is close. Sauce Gardner is a top 3 corner in the NFL, if not number 1. I think he's awesome. DJ Reed on the other side continues to be a great player, probably a top 15 to 20 corner in the NFL as well. So, that is most definitely number 1 in this division. I do think that the Dolphins have some nice pieces as well, though. They've got some really good players, starting with Jalen Ramsey, obviously. He is a great player. I think Kendall Fuller was a really underrated signing over from Washington, especially on the value they got him, 2 years, $15 million. Great deal for them. Cam Smith was a second-round pick from last year. I wasn't the biggest fan of Cam Smith, but I think he is a good player. And then you've also got some nice players like Kader Kohu in that role as the nickel player as well. So I think this Dolphins cornerback room is really solid. I don't think losing Xavier Howard was a big loss. I actually think that it's a big upgrade getting Fuller over him, so definitely not going to ding them too hard for that. The Patriots up at number 3. I loved Christian Gonzalez coming into the draft. I thought he had a great rookie year. I think he's an excellent player, but we haven't seen too much of him. I thought he showed a lot of flashes in that time, but need to continue to build on that momentum there. You've also got good players, though. Jonathan Jones, I think he's a really solid corner. Marcus Jones is a playmaker in the slot, even though he's super undersized. I think it's a really solid corner room. It's nothing special, but it is pretty decent. And then I think the Bills are clearly at number 4. No more Tre'Davious White. He's been often injured, but he was a talented player. Now you're kind of just left with nobody that's really great. Christian Benford, Rasul Douglas, Kyer Elam's been a massive disappointment for them. Teron Johnson's a decent nickel, but definitely nobody that you really feel great about as a number 1 corner. I think they're clearly number 4 in this spot in the division. And then safety. This is a very interesting one. I am going to say that the Dolphins have the best safety room in this division. Part of that has to do with the fact that Jalen Ramsey does play some kind of hybrid safety, but also I love Javon Holland. I think he's an excellent center fielder. He's a playmaker. I love his ability to come up and hit. He is just an athlete at that safety spot, and I really value that. I also think Jordan Poyer, although he is getting older, is a valuable pickup, especially stealing him from the Bills, your division rival. So I do think the Dolphins have the best safeties in this division. The Patriots, I also like what they have. Jabril Peppers has turned into a really nice player for them. You also have Kyle Duggar, who kind of plays a safety in linebacker hybrid role, but I do like what he does. Jalen Hawkins. There's some decent players in the safety room for the Patriots. And then at 3, I think the Jets and the Bills are clearly kind of last in this. I do have the Jets up here. I think Tony Adams is a little bit of a question mark. He has shown some decent things when he's played. I also do think that Chuck Clark is talented. He lost all of last year to injury. Got injured. He was like the first injury of the year. So we'll see if he comes back. I thought he was decent when he was in Baltimore. Ashton Davis, I still kind of believe in him. He was somebody I liked coming out of the draft. So he's not a great player, but he has decent depth in that room. And then the Bills, for a very long time, a lot of people said that the Bills had the best safety room in the NFL. well, they've pretty much moved away from both of those guys that made it so special. They now have Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop as their starters. Bishop, I thought, was overdrafted as a second-round pick. He's got talent, but, just a major unknown there. Rapp, I think, is a fine player, but as a best safety, that's not great. You also have Hamlin and some other guys there, but I think they're clearly number 4 after having such a strong unit for a long time. That is unfortunate for them. Then at coaching, I do think the Dolphins have the best coaching staff in this division. I think Mike McDaniel's one of the best play callers in the NFL. I think he just does such a good job putting to an advantageous situations, taking advantage of the things that he does really well and really amplifying that. And I think more coaches need to do that consistently. And I really, really like what McDaniel does for the offense. Frank Smith, I think, has done a good job as the offensive coordinator. Anthony Weaver, the defensive coordinator here, I think is a really good staff. Then at number 2, I do have the Buffalo Bills. I do think that there are some concerns about kind of Sean McDermott and his ability to get over the hump, but I still think he is a pretty solid coach. I do think that there is maybe a little bit of hot seat talk with him just because he does need to eventually get over the hump and beat the Chiefs or beat the Bengals in the playoffs and hasn't been able to do that yet. You have Joe Brady as your offensive coordinator. He's famously the guy that helped engineer the 2019 LSU run with Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson. I think it's a decent coaching staff, but they do have some pressure under them. I also think that the Jets have some pressure on their coaching staff as well. Robert Saleh has been there a while now. He needs to get his team over the hump and, start to win some games, push for the playoffs. Nathaniel Hackett, the offensive coordinator, he's just there because Aaron Rodgers likes him, but, we'll see. I think he's a fine offensive coordinator. He was a terrible head coach, but then you also have Jeff Ulbrich as the defensive coordinator. Really Saleh's the main engineer behind that defense. So I definitely think they're on the hot seat to really start kicking things into gear. Then the Patriots coaching staff, just complete unknown at this point. Drake Maye, the new head coach. I will be curious to kind of see what this staff looks like without Belichick. Alex Van Pelt, the offensive coordinator. DeMarcus Covington, the defensive coordinator. Just not a lot of information on what the Patriots will look like post-Belichick. We haven't seen what that looks like in a very long time for this Patriots team. So very interested to see how that Patriots coaching staff looks, by this time next year. But that's going to do it for my AFC East positional rankings. Obviously, a lot of hatred between these teams. So let me know what I got wrong in the comments down below. If you like this kind of content, please hit the subscribe button down below. While you're down there, hit the like button as well. Both of those are just free and easy ways to support my channel. Truly means the world to me. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one.